The sound of my gate splintering apart is something I'll never forget. Not just any gate. The gate my grandfather built 40 years ago. The one I inherited, along with every inch of this farm. It wasn't just wood breaking. It was my boundary, my property line, my warning being ripped open by people who thought they could take whatever they wanted. I'd warned them, multiple times. Stay off my farm. Respect what's mine. But the homeowners association next door didn't just ignore me. They bulldozed right through my gate with a backhoe and a smugness that said I didn't matter. I stood there watching it happen, and something cold settled in my chest. Not panic, not fear, clarity. They'd just made the biggest mistake of their lives. I started documenting everything that morning, and I didn't stop until every piece of evidence was locked down tight. By the time I dragged them into a public hearing, they weren't just paying for my new gate. They were paying for every assumption they'd made about who they could push around. If you're watching from somewhere dealing with property battles or pushy neighbors, drop a comment below. This fight was worth every second. The morning I met Nadia Strickland, I was on my knees fixing the gate my grandfather built back in 1978. The wood was weathered gray. The hinges showed rust spots, but it was solid. Strong. My grandfather had built it to last, and it had. When I inherited the farm 7 years ago, I made a promise to keep everything intact. Every fence post, every boundary line, every inch of the 20 acres that had been in our family for 3 generations. That gate was the line between what was mine and what wasn't. I tightened the last screw on the bottom hinge and stepped back to check my work. The gate swung smoothly and quietly now, settling into place with a solid click. March sunlight poured across the lettuce field behind me, turning the rows of young greens into ribbons of yellow and pale green. My chickens were clucking somewhere near the coop, and the air smelled like wet earth and grass. It was the kind of morning that made the hard work feel worth it. Then I heard the engine. A white Lexus SUV rolled slowly down the dirt road and stopped just outside my gate. The door opened, and a woman stepped out. She was maybe early 40s, dressed in a pale pink blazer and dark jeans, heels that had no business being on a dirt road. She smiled at me, the kind of smile people use when they're about to ask for something they already assume they'll get. I didn't smile back. I just stood there with my wrench in hand, waiting. "Good morning," she said, her voice bright and smooth. "You must be Spencer Hale. I'm Nadia Strickland, president of the Meadowbrook Heights Homeowners Association. Our neighborhood is just on the other side of that tree line." She gestured vaguely toward the east, where a cluster of new houses had been sprouting up over the past 2 years. I'd watched them go up, watched the construction trucks roll past, watched the land that used to be quiet ranch land turn into cookie-cutter suburbia. I hadn't said anything about it. It wasn't my business what people did with their own land, but this was my land, and she was standing at my gate like she had a right to be here. "What can I do for you?" "Ms. Strickland." I kept my tone neutral, polite. My grandfather used to say, "You catch more flies with honey, but you don't let anybody walk past your gate without knowing why they're there." She stepped closer, one hand resting lightly on the top rail of my gate. She didn't ask permission. She just touched it, like it was public property. "We're planning some improvements to our drainage system along the eastern boundary," she said. "It'll help manage runoff for the whole area. I wanted to give you a heads up because, well, this boundary line here might need a small adjustment, just a few feet, nothing major." She said it casually, like she was asking me to move a lawn chair. I looked at her hand on my gate. Then I looked at her face. This boundary was surveyed and confirmed by the county in 2018 when I inherited the property, I said. "It matches the original plat from 1978. If your HOA needs something, you'll need to send me a formal request in writing with documentation." Her smile didn't falter, but something shifted in her eyes, something colder. "Of course," she said smoothly. "I just thought a friendly conversation might save us all some paperwork. Neighborly cooperation. You know, it benefits everyone." She pulled out her phone and took a picture of my gate. She didn't ask. She just raised the phone, snapped the shot, and slipped it back into her pocket. The gesture was quick, casual, like she had every right to document my property without my permission. I felt heat crawl up the back of my neck. That wasn't neighborly. That was somebody building a case. I prefer paperwork, I said. Keeps things clear. Nadia tilted her head slightly, still smiling. I understand. Just keep in mind, Mr. Hale, that sometimes holding on to old boundaries can create unnecessary friction. We're all part of the same community now. It's easier when people work together. I didn't respond. I just stood there, wrench still in my hand, and watched her. She held my gaze for a few seconds, then turned and walked back to her SUV. She didn't say goodbye. She just got in, closed the door, and drove away, tires crunching slowly over the gravel. I stood at that gate for a long time after she left, staring at the spot where her hand had rested on the wood. Nadia Strickland had just touched it like it was negotiable, like boundaries were suggestions. And that was the moment I knew. This wasn't going to be a simple neighbor dispute. This was going to be a fight. That evening, I sat on the porch with a cup of coffee and watched the sun sink behind the tree line. The gate stood quiet and solid in the fading light, the same way it had for 40 years. But something had changed. I could feel it in the way my chest felt tight, in the way I kept replaying Nadia's words. Old boundaries create unnecessary friction, as if my land, my livelihood, my home, was just an inconvenience to be smoothed over. I pulled out my phone and opened the Notes app. I typed a single line. March 8th, Nadia Strickland, HOA president, came to gate, wants boundary adjustment, took photo without permission. It felt small, paranoid, even, but some instinct in me said to write it down, to keep track, because if this turned into something bigger, I wanted to know exactly when it started. I looked back at the gate one more time before heading inside. It stood there in the dusk, strong and stubborn, exactly where my grandfather had planted it. They could ask, they could pressure, they could take all the pictures they wanted, but that gate wasn't moving, and neither was I. The letter arrived 5 days later. I found it in my mailbox on a Friday afternoon, tucked between a feed supply catalog and a utility bill. The envelope was crisp white, professional, with a return address printed in neat blue letters. Meadowbrook Heights Community Association. I stood there at the end of my driveway, holding it, already knowing I wasn't going to like what was inside. I tore it open and pulled out a single sheet of letterhead. The language was polite, almost friendly, but underneath the courtesy, there was something harder, something that didn't leave room for disagreement. Dear Mr. Hale, it began. As discussed during our recent conversation, the Meadowbrook Heights Community Association is moving forward with critical drainage improvements to serve our 120-member households, to ensure proper water management and compliance with county standards. We respectfully request your cooperation in adjusting the eastern boundary fence line by approximately 3 feet to accommodate necessary infrastructure. This minor adjustment will benefit the broader community and help prevent flooding issues that could impact surrounding properties. We believe this collaborative approach serves the common good and reflects the spirit of neighborly cooperation. Please contact our office at your earliest convenience to discuss implementation. Sincerely, Nadia Strickland, President, Meadowbrook Heights HOA. I read it twice, then a third time. Nowhere in that letter was there a citation to an actual county code, no reference to a specific regulation, no attached documentation or survey map. Just vague phrases like county standards and necessary infrastructure, and that line about common good sat in my chest like a stone. My land wasn't common. It was mine. I walked back to the house and sat down at the kitchen table. I pulled out my phone and called the county land records office. A woman answered on the third ring, her voice patient and slightly bored. I explained the situation as clearly as I could. A neighboring HOA was claiming they needed to adjust my boundary for drainage purposes. Did the county have any record of changes to the right-of-way or easements on my property? She put me on hold. I listened to generic hold music for almost 10 minutes, staring out the window at the field where my grandfather used to run cattle before he switched to produce. When she came back on the line, her answer was short and definitive. No changes to the right-of-way on parcel APN 245-08803 since the last survey in 2018. If someone's claiming otherwise, they need to provide documentation. We don't have anything on file. I thanked her and hung up. Then I sat there for a while, just breathing, So Nadia's letter was smoke, a bluff, an attempt to pressure me into giving up land I didn't have to give up. I opened my laptop and drafted a response. I kept it short, factual, no emotion. Ms. Strickland, I have reviewed your letter dated March 13th. I contacted the County Land Records Office and confirmed that there have been no changes to easements or right-of-way boundaries on my property since 2018. My boundary line, as established by the original plat and confirmed by the county survey, will remain as is. If your association believes it has a legal basis for requesting an adjustment, please provide specific code citations, engineering reports, and documentation from the county. I am not willing to discuss informal adjustments. Respectfully, Spencer Hale. I attached a PDF scan of my 2018 survey and hit send. It felt good for about 30 seconds. Then the doubt crept in. What if they didn't care about documentation? What if they just kept pushing anyway? That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about Nadia's smile, the way she'd touched my gate like it was already hers, the way the letter used words like respectfully request while making it clear they expected compliance. Around 2 in the morning, I got up and went out to the porch. The air was cool and still. I could see the lights from Meadowbrook Heights glowing faintly through the trees to the east. A whole neighborhood of people who probably had no idea their HOA president was trying to take a piece of land that didn't belong to them. Or maybe they did know. Maybe they'd all voted on it in some meeting I'd never been invited to. Maybe to them, I was just the stubborn farmer standing in the way of progress. I pulled out my phone and opened the Notes app again. Under the entry from March 8th, I added a new line. March 13th, received a formal letter from the HOA requesting 3-foot boundary adjustment. Claims drainage necessity and county standards. County Land Office confirms no changes on file. Sent response declining and requesting documentation. It felt small, but some instinct told me to keep writing it down, to build a timeline, because if this kept going, I wanted proof of every step. The next morning, I went out to check the eastern fence line. The fence looked the same, solid, undisturbed, but as I walked along it, I noticed something that stopped me cold. Fresh tire tracks in the dirt just outside the fence, near the tree line, wide, deep, the kind a truck would leave. And there were boot prints, 2 sets. One pair looked like work boots, the other looked like hiking shoes or sneakers. I crouched down and took a picture with my phone. The prints were recent, maybe from yesterday or the day before, while I'd been reading their polite letter about cooperation and community standards. Someone had already been out here, walking my fence line, measuring, maybe, or just looking. I stood up and scanned the area, but there was nothing else out of place. No markers, no flags, just tracks. I added another note. March 14th, found fresh tire tracks and boot prints along the eastern fence. 2 people. No visible survey markers or equipment left behind. My hands were steady as I typed, but my mind was racing. They weren't waiting for my response. They were already moving forward, already planning, already treating my land like it was theirs to manage. I walked back to the house, and for the first time since this whole thing started, I felt something shift inside me. It wasn't anger yet. It was colder than that. It was clarity. They thought I'd back down. They thought a polite letter and some vague talk about community standards would be enough to make me fold. They were wrong. I didn't sleep well for the next 3 nights. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw those boot prints in the dirt. 2 people, walking on my land without permission, treating my fence line like it was public property. By Tuesday morning, I'd made a decision. If they were going to keep showing up uninvited, I needed to know when, how often, and what they were doing. I drove into town and stopped at the hardware store on Main Street. The place smelled like sawdust and motor oil, and the aisles were narrow and packed tight with tools and supplies. I found what I was looking for in the back corner. Trail cameras, the kind hunters use to monitor deer movement. Motion activated, battery powered, weatherproof. I bought 3 of them, along with a pack of lithium batteries and extra SD cards. Back at the farm, I spent the afternoon setting them up. One camera went on a fence post near the gate, angled to capture anyone who approached from the road. The second one, I mounted on a tree along the eastern fence line, pointing toward the spot where I'd found the tire tracks. The third I placed further south, covering a section of the boundary that ran close to the Meadowbrook tree line. I made sure each camera was camouflaged behind branches and set to record video with timestamps. If someone came onto my property again, I'd have proof. Date, time, faces if I was lucky. I tested each camera, watched the little red light blink on, then fade. Everything worked. I felt a small sense of control settle back into my chest. Not much, but enough. That night, I sat at the kitchen table with my laptop open and started organizing everything I had so far. I created a folder on my desktop and labeled it Boundary Dispute, March 2020. Inside, I made subfolders, one for correspondence, one for county records, one for photos, one for notes. I saved the letter from Nadia, my email response, the scan of my survey, and the pictures of the boot prints. Then I printed hard copies of everything and put them in a 3-ring binder. My grandfather used to keep all his farm records in binders like this: receipts, contracts, maintenance logs. He said the paper didn't crash or disappear. I was starting to understand why. I wrote a note on the first page. Timeline started March 8th, 2025. Nadia Strickland, Meadowbrook Heights HOA. Initial contacted gate. Seeing it all laid out like that made it feel more real, more serious. This wasn't just a neighbor being pushy. This was something that could escalate, and I needed to be ready. Wednesday morning, I went out to check the chicken coop and noticed something that made my stomach drop. Fresh footprints. Not near the fence this time, inside my property line, about 8 feet past the eastern boundary, near an old oak tree I used as a reference point when I mowed. The prints were clean, recent, probably from early that morning or the night before. I crouched down and studied them. Work boots again. The size looked like a 10 or 11. Whoever it was had walked right past my fence, stood under the oak for a while, then walked back out the same way. I pulled out my phone and took pictures from 3 different angles. Then I checked the trail camera mounted on the nearby tree. The SD card was still there. I popped it out, walked back to the house, and plugged it into my laptop. The footage loaded slowly. I scrolled through the timestamps until I found it. Yesterday, 3:17 p.m. 2 men in high-visibility vests and hard hats. One of them was carrying a clipboard. The other had some kind of handheld device, maybe a laser measuring tool. They walked right past my fence like it wasn't there, stopped under the oak tree, and spent about 5 minutes pointing at different spots along the boundary. The man with the clipboard was writing something down. The other one aimed the laser tool back toward the fence, then toward the Meadowbrook tree line. They didn't look around, didn't act like they were doing anything wrong. They just worked, casual and confident, like they had every right to be there. Then they walked back out and disappeared off camera. I watched the footage 3 more times, my jaw getting tighter each time. They weren't just scouting anymore. They were surveying, measuring, planning something. I saved the video file, backed it up to an external drive, and added it to my evidence folder. Then I called the county sheriff's non-emergency line. A dispatcher answered, her voice calm and professional. I explained the situation. Trespassing on my property, people entering without permission, conducting what looked like surveying work. I had it on camera. Could someone come out and take a report? She asked for my address, my parcel number, and a description of the individuals. I gave her everything I had. She told me a deputy would be out within the next few hours to document it. But she also said something that made my chest tighten. If there's no visible damage to your property and no direct threat, this will likely be classified as a civil trespass. We'll document it, but you may need to handle the rest through a lawyer or the courts. I thanked her and hung up. Civil trespass. That meant no arrests, no immediate consequences. Just a report in a file somewhere, but at least it would be on record. At least there'd be documentation that this was happening. 2 hours later, a sheriff's deputy pulled up my driveway in a white and tan patrol SUV. He was older, maybe mid-50s, with graying hair and a weathered face. He introduced himself as Deputy Carver and asked to see where the trespassing had occurred. I walked him out to the eastern fence line and showed him the footprints, the spot under the oak tree, and played the video on my phone. He watched it without saying much, then made some notes in a small notebook. "You're sure these guys don't have permission to be here?" he asked. Sure, I said. This is my land. I never gave anyone from Meadowbrook or their HOA permission to set foot past that fence. He nodded and wrote something else down. I'll file this as a trespass report. You'll get a case number in a day or two. My advice: put up no trespassing signs every 50 feet along your boundary. Make it crystal clear, and if they come back, call us immediately. If we catch them in the act, we can issue a citation. He handed me a business card. You might also want to talk to a lawyer. This sounds like it could turn into a property dispute, and those get messy fast. I took the card and thanked him. He got back in his SUV and drove off, leaving me standing there by the fence. I looked at the boot prints in the dirt, at the oak tree, at the camera hidden in the branches. I thought about what Deputy Carver had said. Put up signs, call a lawyer, prepare for it to get messy. I walked back to the house and added another entry to my timeline. March 18th, discovered trespassing inside the property line. 2 individuals in high-vis vests, one with a clipboard, one with a laser measuring tool. Trail camera footage captured at 3:17 p.m. A sheriff's deputy filed a trespass report. Advised to post no trespassing signs and consult an attorney. My hands didn't shake as I typed. My breathing stayed steady. But inside, something had shifted again. This wasn't just pressure anymore. This was an invasion. They'd crossed the line, literally. And now I had proof. I opened a new browser tab and searched for Property Rights Attorney Texas. It was time to stop reacting and start building a real defense. Because they weren't going to stop, and neither was I. I woke up at 5:30 on Thursday morning to the sound of a diesel engine. It was loud, close, and wrong. I sat up in bed, heart pounding, and listened. The engine wasn't on the road. It was on my property. I pulled on jeans and boots, grabbed my phone, and ran outside. The sky was still dark, just starting to lighten at the edges. And there, about 100 feet past my eastern fence line, was a yellow backhoe. Its headlights cut through the pre-dawn gray, and the bucket was already in the dirt, tearing up a shallow trench parallel to my boundary. A white pickup truck was parked nearby, and 2 men in orange safety vests stood watching the machine work. My gate, the gate my grandfather built, was lying on the ground, splintered. The hinges were bent and torn from the posts, and the wood had split down the middle like someone had rammed it with a vehicle. I stood there for 3 seconds, frozen. Then the anger hit. I pulled out my phone and started recording video as I walked toward them. My hands were shaking, but I kept the camera steady. The backhoe operator saw me coming and stopped digging. He killed the engine, and suddenly everything was quiet except for the sound of my boots on dirt. One of the men in vest turned toward me. I didn't recognize him. He was maybe 40, stocky, with a hard hat and a radio clipped to his belt. Before I could say anything, another vehicle pulled up, Nadia Strickland's white Lexus. She stepped out, dressed in dark slacks and a blazer, holding a clipboard and her phone. She walked toward me with that same calm, controlled smile, like breaking down my gate and digging up my land was just part of a normal workday. "Mr. Hale," she said, her voice pleasant and unbothered. "We're conducting emergency drainage work under County Code 42.88. This is necessary to prevent flooding that affects 120 households in Meadowbrook Heights. I'm sorry we had to start early, but the work is time-sensitive." I looked past her at my gate, at the trench being dug 15 feet inside my property line, at the men standing there, like they had every right to be on my land. "You broke my gate," I said. My voice was low, tight, barely controlled. "You're on my property without permission. You don't have a permit to do this." Nadia's smile didn't change. "We contacted county engineering about drainage code compliance. They confirmed the necessity of this work. If you obstruct it, you'll be interfering with public safety measures. I'd hate for this to become a legal issue for you." She said it so smoothly, so confidently, like I was the one breaking the law. I pulled my phone up higher, making sure the camera was still recording. "Show me the permit," I said. "Show me the county approval to dig on my land." She tilted her head slightly, the clipboard shifting in her hands. "We have documentation from county engineering, an email exchange confirming code compliance. That's sufficient for emergency measures." I felt my jaw clench. "An email is not a permit. You need a signed, approved permit to do construction on private property, and you don't have one. Do you? For the first time. Something flickered in her expression. Annoyance, maybe anger, but she covered it fast. Mr. Hale, I understand you're upset, but you need to understand that your refusal to cooperate has forced us to take action. Meadowbrook Heights has a responsibility to protect its residents. If your property is contributing to drainage problems, we have the authority to address it. I stepped closer, close enough that she had to look up slightly to meet my eyes. You broke my gate. You're digging on my land. And I'm calling the sheriff right now. Stay exactly where you are. I dialed 911. My hand was steady now, cold and steady. The dispatcher answered, and I spoke clearly, loudly enough that everyone could hear. I need a deputy at my property immediately. Someone has destroyed my gate and is conducting unauthorized construction on my land. I have video evidence. This is active trespassing and vandalism. The dispatcher asked for my address and said a unit was on the way. I hung up and looked at Nadia. Her face was tight now. No more smiles. You're making a mistake, she said quietly. This is bigger than your fence line. You're going to regret obstructing community safety. I didn't answer. I just stood there, phone still recording, and waited. The backhoe operator climbed down from his machine and walked over to the pickup. The two men in vests exchanged glances. Nobody moved. Nobody left. They were calling my bluff, waiting to see if I'd back down. 20 minutes later, a sheriff's SUV rolled up my driveway. Deputy Carver stepped out, the same officer who'd filed the trespass report 2 days ago. He walked over, took one look at my broken gate, then looked at the backhoe and the trench. Who authorized this work? He asked. Nadia stepped forward, clipboard ready. Deputy, we're conducting emergency drainage work under county code compliance. We have correspondence with county engineering confirming the necessity. She pulled out her phone and showed him an email thread. Carver read it, his face neutral. Then he looked at me. Mr. Hale, do you have your property survey? I pulled it up on my phone, the PDF I'd scanned weeks ago. He looked at it, then walked over to the trench and paced it off, 15 feet inside my boundary. He came back and looked at Nadia. Ma'am, correspondence with county engineering is not the same as a construction permit, and this work is clearly on private property. Do you have a signed permit from the county? Nadia's expression hardened. We were told this work was compliant. Carver shook his head. That's not what I asked. Do you have a permit, yes or no? She didn't answer right away. The silence stretched out. Finally, she said, we're in the process of finalizing it. Carver pulled out his notebook. Then you need to stop work immediately. This is a civil property dispute now, and you're conducting unauthorized construction. I can't make arrests, but I'm documenting this as vandalism and trespassing. Mr. Hale, you'll need to pursue this through a civil complaint or an attorney. He took photos of the gate, the trench, and the equipment. He wrote down the names of the backhoe operator and the two men in vests. He took a statement from me and asked for a copy of the video I'd recorded. I sent it to his email right there. Nadia stood off to the side, arms crossed, watching. When Carver finished, he looked at her. Ma'am, I'm advising you to leave this property and not return without written permission from the owner or a valid court order. If you come back, Mr. Hale can press charges for criminal trespassing. She didn't say anything. She just turned, got in her Lexus, and drove off. The backhoe operator and the other men packed up and followed. Within 10 minutes, my property was empty again. Just me, Deputy Carver, and the wreckage of my gate. I stood there looking at the broken wood, the torn hinges, the dirt piled up where my lettuce rows used to be. Carver handed me a case number on a card. Get a lawyer, Mr. Hale, today, if you can. This is going to get worse before it gets better. I took the card and nodded. He got back in his SUV and left. I walked over to my gate and crouched down. 40 years old, built with my grandfather's hands. Now destroyed because someone decided my boundary didn't matter. I took more pictures. Close-ups of the splintered wood, the bent hinges, the tire tracks from the backhoe. I recorded a voice memo with the date, time, and everything that had happened. Then I walked back to the house, sat down at my kitchen table, and searched for property rights attorneys in Texas. I found one 30 minutes away. Tom Rivera. His website said he specialized in land disputes, HOA abuse cases, and boundary conflicts. I called his office. The receptionist said he had an opening that afternoon at 2. I took it. I sat there for a while after I hung up, just breathing. My chest felt tight. My hands were still shaking a little. But underneath all that, there was something else. Something colder and sharper. Clarity. They'd crossed a line they couldn't uncross. They'd destroyed my property. They'd lied to law enforcement. And now I had everything on record. Video, photos, sheriff's reports, a timeline. I opened my laptop and added a new entry. March 21st. HOA destroyed the gate and conducted unauthorized digging 15 feet inside the property line. Claimed emergency drainage work. No permit. Deputy Carver documented vandalism and trespassing. Meeting with attorney Tom Rivera today at 2 p.m. I looked at the screen. In the folder full of evidence. At the binder sitting on the table. This wasn't just about a gate anymore. This was about making sure they paid for every inch they'd taken. And I was done asking nicely. Tom Rivera's office was in a converted house on Main Street, wedged between a coffee shop and a tax preparer. The sign outside was simple. Rivera Law, Property Rights, and Civil Litigation. I parked my truck out front and walked up the wooden steps to the porch. Inside, the place smelled like old books and coffee. The floors were hardwood, scuffed and worn, and the walls were lined with shelves packed tight with legal texts and binders. A receptionist in her 60s looked up from her desk and smiled. I gave her my name, and she told me Tom would be ready in a minute. I sat down in a chair by the window and waited, my binder balanced on my lap. 5 minutes later, a man appeared in the doorway. Tom Rivera was mid-50s, with graying hair, wire-rimmed glasses, wearing jeans and a button-down shirt with the sleeves rolled up. He looked more like a high school teacher than a lawyer, but his handshake was firm and his eyes were sharp. "Spencer Hale," he said. "Come on back." I followed him into his office. It was small, cluttered, with a wooden desk covered in files and a laptop open to a satellite map. He gestured for me to sit, then settled into his chair and leaned forward. "Tell me what's going on," he said. So I did. I started with Nadia's first visit to my gate. The letter, the email exchange, the trespassing, the boot prints, the trail camera footage, and then this morning, the backhoe, the broken gate, the lies about permits and county codes. I showed him everything. The photos, the video, the deputy's report, my timeline. Tom didn't interrupt. He just listened, taking notes on a yellow legal pad, occasionally asking me to clarify a date or a detail. When I finished, he sat back in his chair and looked at the ceiling for a moment. Then he looked at me. "They don't have authority over your land," he said. "You're not part of their HOA. You're not bound by their covenants. Texas property code is clear on that. They can't enforce HOA rules on property that was never part of the subdivision." He pulled up a map on his laptop and zoomed in on my parcel. "Your land is independently deeded. It predates Meadowbrook Heights by decades. They know that, which means what they're doing isn't a mistake. It's deliberate." I felt my jaw tighten. "So what do I do?" Tom leaned forward, his fingers steepled under his chin. "We build a case, a strong one, and we don't just stop them. We make them pay for what they've already done." He pulled out a fresh legal pad and started writing. "First, we file a cease and desist letter. Formal. Legal. Citing specific statutes. We demand they stop all activity on your property immediately and restore what they damaged. Second, we file a complaint with the county sheriff for criminal trespassing and vandalism. You've already got the deputy's report, which is good. Third, we file a civil lawsuit for property damage, trespassing, and possibly fraud if we can prove they misrepresented their authority." He looked up at me. "But here's the most important part. We document everything. Every interaction, every email, every time they set foot near your property. You've already started that, which puts you ahead. Now we make it airtight." Tom opened a drawer and pulled out a stack of forms. "I'm going to need copies of everything you have, the deed, the survey, all correspondence, all photos and videos. I'll organize it into a legal file. We'll also get you set up with a cloud backup so nothing gets lost." He slid a checklist across the desk. "This is what I need you to do. 1. Keep all your trail cameras running and check them daily. 2. Do not engage with Nadia or anyone from the HOA in person. All communication goes through me from now on. 3. If they show up again, do not confront them. Call the sheriff immediately and record everything. 4. Start getting estimates for repairing your gate and any other damage. We'll need dollar amounts for the lawsuit. I looked at the checklist. It was clear, concrete, a plan, for the first time since this whole thing started. I felt like I wasn't just reacting. I was taking control. How long does this take? I asked. Tom shrugged. Depends on how they respond. If they back off after the cease, maybe a few weeks to settle damages. If they fight, it could go months, maybe a year. But here's the thing. You've got the law on your side. You've got evidence. And you've got documentation that shows a pattern of harassment and trespassing. That puts you in a strong position. He leaned back in his chair. I've dealt with HOAs like this before. They rely on intimidation. They assume people won't fight back because it's expensive and exhausting. But when someone does fight back and does it right, they fold because they know they're in the wrong. I left Tom's office an hour later with a stack of paperwork, a retainer agreement signed, and a plan. He was going to draft the cease and desist letter and have it ready by tomorrow. He'd also start the process of filing a formal complaint with the county and preparing a civil suit. My job was simple. Keep documenting, keep my distance, and let him handle the legal fight. I drove back to the farm and spent the rest of the afternoon following Tom's instructions. I backed up all my photos and videos to a cloud drive. I made extra copies on 2 USB sticks and put them in separate places. One is in my safe, one in my truck. I wrote out a detailed timeline of every single event, including times, dates, and names where I had them. I took new photos of the destroyed gate from every angle and measured the length of the trench the backhoe had dug. 15 feet, 2 inches inside my property line. Then I went into town and got 3 estimates for replacing the gate. The cheapest was $800. The most expensive was $1,200. I saved all 3 quotes in my evidence folder. By the time the sun went down, I had everything organized. Every file is labeled. Every piece of evidence is cataloged. I sat at my kitchen table and looked at the binder, now twice as thick as it had been that morning. This wasn't just a collection of complaints anymore. It was a case. A real, documented, legally sound case. And I was ready to use it. I opened my laptop and checked my email. There was a new message from Tom. Subject line, cease draft for review. I opened it and read through the letter. It was sharp, professional. It cited Texas Property Code sections 202 and 205. It demanded immediate cessation of all trespassing, destruction, and harassment. It demanded compensation for damages, and it warned that failure to comply would result in civil and criminal action. I read it twice, then wrote back, approved. Send it. I hit send and closed the laptop. Then I walked out to the porch and stood there in the dark, looking toward the tree line where Meadowbrook Heights sat, quiet and lit up like nothing had happened. They thought they could bulldoze over me. Literally. They thought I'd fold, give in, let them take what they wanted because fighting back was too hard. They were wrong, and by the time I was done, they were going to know exactly how wrong they'd been. The cease and desist letter went out Friday morning by certified mail. Tom called me at noon to confirm it had been delivered and signed for by someone at the Meadowbrook Heights HOA office. Now we wait, he said. They have 72 hours to respond. If they ignore it, we file the lawsuit. I thanked him and hung up. Then I went back to my routine, checking the cameras, documenting everything, waiting. Saturday passed quietly. No vehicles, no footprints, no sign of anyone from the HOA. It felt like the calm before something bigger, and I didn't trust it. Sunday evening, just after dark, my doorbell rang. I wasn't expecting anyone. I walked to the front door and looked through the window. A woman stood on my porch, small-framed, late 20s, wearing a gray hoodie and jeans. Her hands were shoved in her pockets, and she kept glancing over her shoulder toward the road. I didn't recognize her. I opened the door, but left the screen door latched. "Can I help you?" She looked up at me, her face pale and tense. "Mr. Hale, my name is Ellie Kurtz. I'm on the Meadowbrook HOA board. I need to talk to you. It's important." I hesitated. Another HOA board member on my porch didn't exactly inspire trust, but something about the way she stood there, nervous and looking over her shoulder, made me think this wasn't a setup. I unlatched the screen door and stepped back. "Come in." She walked inside quickly, like she didn't want to be seen. I closed the door and led her to the kitchen table. She sat down, pulled a small USB drive from her pocket, and set it on the table between us. "I don't agree with what Nadia's doing," she said quietly. "I've been on the board for 2 years, and I've watched her push boundaries before. But this is different. This is illegal, and I can't be part of it anymore." I sat down across from her. "What's on the drive?" Ellie took a breath. "Emails, meeting minutes, internal documents. Nadia has a deal with a developer named Garrett Mills. If the HOA can expand the community footprint by another 15 acres, Mills will build 40 more homes. Nadia gets an 8% commission on every sale. But to make that work, they need your land, or at least part of it, enough to justify extending the drainage system and the access road." I felt my chest tighten. "So this was never about drainage." She shook her head. "The drainage issue is real, but it's manageable without touching your property. Nadia's using it as an excuse. She's been planning this since January. There are emails in there where she tells Mills your land will be available by the 3rd quarter this year. She said she was handling it." I picked up the USB drive and turned it over in my hand. "Why are you telling me this?" Ellie looked down at the table. "Because it's wrong, and because you're not the first. Last year, there was a rancher named Paul Harris who owned land south of Meadowbrook. Nadia went after him, too. Different tactics. They cut off access to a shared water line, then accused him of contaminating runoff. He couldn't afford to fight it. He sold his land for half what it was worth and moved to New Mexico." She looked up at me, her eyes hard. "I voted against that. I was outvoted. But I'm not going to sit by and watch it happen again." I plugged the USB into my laptop and opened the files. There were dozens of emails. The first one I clicked on was dated January 15th, from Nadia to Garrett Mills. "Hail parcel analysis attached. 20 acres. AG exempt. Good access. The owner is 3rd generation. Likely sentimental. Recommend a pressure campaign starting in March. Estimate acquisition by June." I scrolled through more emails. Strategy discussions. Timelines. Budget projections for legal fees if I fought back. They'd planned for everything. Except maybe this. Except someone on the inside decides to blow the whistle. I looked at Ellie. "Does anyone else on the board know you're here?" She shook her head. "No, and I need to keep it that way. If Nadia finds out, she'll come after me. She's vindictive." I printed the most damning emails and added them to my evidence binder. Then I copied the entire contents of the USB to my backup drives. "I'm meeting with my attorney tomorrow morning," I said. "This changes everything. You just handed me proof of conspiracy and fraud." Ellie stood up. "There's one more thing. Paul Harris, the rancher I mentioned. I have his phone number. He might be willing to talk to you. If you can show a pattern of behavior, it strengthens your case." She pulled out her phone and texted me the contact. "Thank you," I said. She nodded, pulled her hood up, and headed for the door. I walked her out and watched as she got into a small sedan and drove off into the dark. I stood there for a minute, the USB drive still in my hand, trying to process what had just happened. This wasn't just about my land anymore. This was bigger, systematic, a pattern of abuse that had been going on for at least a year, maybe longer, and now I had proof. I went back inside and called Tom Rivera. It was almost 9, but he picked up on the second ring. I told him everything. The visit from Ellie, the emails, the developer deal, the connection to Paul Harris. Tom was quiet for a moment. Then I heard him let out a long breath. "Spencer, this is big, really big. If we can get Harris to testify or provide a statement, and if these emails hold up, we're not just talking about a property dispute anymore. We're talking about a pattern of fraud, conspiracy, and abuse of authority. Nadia could face criminal charges. The HOA could be liable for punitive damages." He paused. "Get me those files first thing tomorrow, and reach out to Harris. See if he'll talk. If he will, we might be able to turn this into a class action, or at least a much stronger case." I hung up and sat down at the kitchen table. I opened my laptop and looked at the folder of emails again. Nadia's words stared back at me from the screen. Owner is third generation, likely sentimental. Recommend pressure campaign. She'd calculated it all, measured my attachment to this place, planned how to break me down. But she'd made one mistake. She'd assumed I'd break. I pulled out my phone and opened the contact Ellie had sent me. Paul Harris. I typed out a message. Mr. Harris, my name is Spencer Hale. I own a farm next to Meadowbrook Heights HOA. I'm dealing with a situation similar to what you went through last year. If you're willing, I'd like to talk. I think we can help each other. I hit send. Then I leaned back in my chair and stared at the ceiling. The fight had just gotten bigger, but so had my ammunition. Paul Harris called me back Monday morning. His voice was quiet, careful, like he'd spent the last year learning not to trust people. He told me his story, how Meadowbrook had cut his access to a shared easement, then blamed him for water contamination they'd fabricated, how Nadia had shown up at his door with an offer to buy his land at 40% below market value, framed as a favor, how he'd fought for 3 months, spent $15,000 on lawyers, and finally gave up because he couldn't afford to keep going. I should have held out, he said, but I was tired, and she knew it. I asked if he'd be willing to provide a written statement and testify if it came to that. He was silent for a long moment. Then he said yes. If it stops her from doing this to someone else, I'll do it. Tom Rivera moved fast. By Wednesday, he'd filed a formal civil complaint in county court. Trespassing, vandalism, fraud, conspiracy to deprive property rights. He attached Ellie's emails, my video evidence, the sheriff's reports, and Paul Harris's affidavit. He also requested an emergency hearing before the County Board of Supervisors to address the unauthorized construction and the HOA's abuse of authority. The hearing was scheduled for the following week, Wednesday evening, at 7 p.m., at the County Administration Building. It would be public, open to anyone who wants to attend. Tom said that was exactly what we wanted. Nadia's power comes from operating in the shadows, he told me. We drag this into the light, and she loses that power. The night before the hearing, I couldn't sleep. I went over everything in my head. The timeline, the evidence, the emails. I knew what I needed to say. I knew what Tom would present. But there was still a knot in my stomach. A fear that somehow, even with everything we had, they'd find a way to twist it, to make me look like the problem. I got up at 5 a.m. and drove into town. I stopped at a diner and forced myself to eat breakfast. Then I sat in my truck in the parking lot and waited for the day to pass. By 6:30 that evening, I was standing outside the county building with Tom. He was wearing a suit, carrying a leather briefcase, and he looked calm, confident. You ready? He asked. I nodded. Let's go. The hearing room was bigger than I expected. Rows of plastic chairs faced a long table where 3 county supervisors sat. Maybe 50 people were already seated. I recognized some faces from Meadowbrook, a few local reporters with notebooks, and in the front row, Nadia Strickland. She was dressed in a navy blazer, sitting next to a man in a gray suit. Her lawyer, I assumed. She didn't look at me when I walked in. Tom and I sat in the second row. Paul Harris was there too, sitting off to the side. Ellie Kurtz was in the back, hood pulled up, trying to stay invisible. At exactly 7 p.m., the lead supervisor, a woman in her 60s named Margaret Chen, called the meeting to order. We're here to address a formal complaint filed by Mr. Spencer Hale regarding alleged trespassing, property damage, and misconduct by the Meadowbrook Heights Homeowners Association. Mr. Hale, you have the floor. Tom stood up and walked to the podium. He didn't waste time. Thank you. Supervisor Chen, my client. Spencer Hale owns a 20-acre farm that predates the Meadowbrook Heights subdivision by decades. His property is independently deeded and is not subject to HOA authority. Despite this, the Meadowbrook HOA, under the direction of President Nadia Strickland, has conducted a months-long campaign of harassment, trespassing, and property destruction in an attempt to pressure Mr. Hale into surrendering part of his land. Tom opened his briefcase and pulled out a stack of documents. He handed copies to the supervisors and projected images onto the screen behind him. First, a photo of my destroyed gate. Then, footage from my trail camera showing the 2 men in high-vis vests walking onto my property. Then the emails from Nadia to Garrett Mills. He read one aloud. Hale parcel will be available by the third quarter. The owner is third generation, likely sentimental. Recommend a pressure campaign starting in March. Estimate acquisition by June. The room went completely silent. Tom let it hang there for a moment. Then he continued. This was never about drainage. This was about forcing Mr. Hale off his land, so the HOA could facilitate a development deal worth millions of dollars. Ms. Strickland stood to gain an 8% commission. To achieve this, she authorized trespassing, vandalism, and the filing of false claims with county engineering. He pulled up another document, an email from the county engineering to Nadia. Your inquiry regarding code compliance is noted. However, no permit application has been submitted or approved for construction on parcel APN 24508-803. Tom turned to face Nadia. Ms. Strickland told my client and a county sheriff's deputy that she had county approval. She did not. She lied, and she destroyed private property based on that lie. Nadia's lawyer stood up. Supervisor Chen, this is a gross mischaracterization. My client acted in good faith based on her understanding of county drainage codes. Any miscommunication was unintentional. The HOA has a responsibility to protect its residents from flooding, and Ms. Strickland was fulfilling that duty. Tom didn't let him finish. Good faith does not include planning a pressure campaign in January to acquire land by June. Good faith does not include breaking down a gate with a backhoe at 5:30 in the morning. And good faith does not include lying to law enforcement about having a permit. Supervisor Chen leaned forward. Mr. Strickland, did you or did you not have a valid construction permit when you authorized work on Mr. Hale's property? Nadia stood up slowly. Her face was tight, controlled, but I could see the tension in her shoulders. We had correspondence with county engineering. We believed that was sufficient for emergency drainage work. Chen's expression didn't change. That's not what I asked. Did you have a permit, yes or no? The silence stretched out. Nadia's lawyer whispered something to her. She ignored him. No, she said finally. We did not have a formal permit, but the work was necessary to prevent flooding that could have affected over 100 households. Tom jumped in. Supervisor, I'd like to introduce testimony from Mr. Paul Harris. He gestured to Paul, who stood up and walked to the podium. Paul's voice was steady, but you could hear the anger underneath. Last year, Meadowbrook HOA targeted my ranch. They cut my access to a shared water line and accused me of contaminating runoff. None of it was true. Nadia Strickland showed up at my property and offered to buy my land for less than half its value. She told me it would save me the legal trouble. I fought for 3 months. I spent everything I had, and then I gave up. I sold my land and left. He looked directly at Nadia. She's doing the same thing to Mr. Hale. This is a pattern, and it needs to stop. The room erupted. People in the Meadowbrook section started murmuring. A reporter in the back stood up to get a better view. Supervisor Chen banged her gavel. Order. We will have an order. She looked at Nadia. Ms. Strickland, do you have a response to Mr. Harris's testimony? Nadia stood again, but this time her composure cracked. Mr. Harris's situation was completely different. He violated easement agreements, and we had every right to address that. This has nothing to do with Mr. Hale. Tom cut in. Actually, it has everything to do with Mr. Hale, because it shows a deliberate pattern of using HOA authority to target independent landowners for financial gain. And we have documentation proving it. He projected another email, this one from Nadia to her board. Harris's property acquired below market. Mills development is on schedule. Recommend a similar approach for future expansion targets. The air went out of the room. Nadia's face went pale. Her lawyer grabbed her arm and pulled her back down into her seat. Supervisor Chen looked at the other 2 supervisors. They nodded. She turned back to the room. Based on the evidence presented, this board is referring this matter to the county district attorney for investigation into potential criminal fraud, abuse of authority, and conspiracy. Additionally, the Meadowbrook Heights HOA is hereby ordered to cease all activity on Mr. Hale's property immediately and to pay restitution for damages of $1,200 for gate replacement, $400 for crop loss, and $3,000 in legal fees. Failure to comply will result in further legal action. She banged the gavel. This hearing is adjourned. The room erupted again. People were talking, reporters were scribbling notes, and Nadia was standing frozen at the front of the room. Her lawyer was gathering papers and whispering urgently in her ear. I just sat there, breathing. It was over. Not the whole fight. Maybe. But this part. The part where I had to prove I wasn't crazy. That I wasn't the problem. That she had done exactly what I said she'd done. Tom put a hand on my shoulder. "You did it," he said quietly. I looked at him. Then, at Nadia. Still standing there. Her carefully built facade was crumbling in front of 50 witnesses. I didn't feel triumphant. I just felt tired. And relieved. And for the first time in weeks, I'd done the right thing. 2 weeks after the hearing, I stood at my property line watching a crew install the new gate. It was steel this time. Black powder-coated frame, stainless steel hinges, and an electronic lock I could control from my phone. It was stronger than the old wooden gate, more secure, but I'd be lying if I said it felt the same. My grandfather's gate had history. Weight. This one was functional. Necessary. A response to what had been taken. The crew foreman walked over and handed me the remote. "All set. Mr. Hale, gates programmed to your phone. Code can be changed any time through the app." I thanked him and watched as they packed up their tools and drove off. Then I stood there alone, looking at the new gate. It was solid, unbreakable. But it wasn't just a gate anymore. It was a reminder, a line I'd had to defend, a boundary I'd refused to let anyone erase. The check from Meadowbrook Heights had arrived 3 days after the hearing. $4,600. Exactly what the board had ordered. It came with a 1-sentence letter signed by the interim HOA president, someone I'd never heard of. Payment in full per county order, dated April 2nd. No apology, no acknowledgement of what they'd done. Just a check and a legal obligation fulfilled. I deposited it and used it to pay Tom's remaining fees and cover the cost of the new gate. There was a little left over. I put it toward replanting the section of lettuce they'd torn up. The district attorney's office contacted me the week after the hearing. An investigator named Sarah Ortiz wanted to interview me as part of their case against Nadia Strickland. I met with her for 2 hours, walked her through everything, and handed over copies of all my evidence. She told me Nadia was being charged with criminal trespassing, fraud, and conspiracy to commit theft by deception. If convicted, she could face up to 2 years in jail and fines up to $10,000. A month later, I got a call from Ellie Kurtz. She'd resigned from the HOA board the day after the hearing. "I couldn't stay," she said. "Not after everything that came out. But I wanted you to know the board held an emergency vote. Nadia was removed as president, banned from holding any position in the HOA, and they're reviewing every land acquisition she was involved in over the past 3 years." She paused. "Paul Harris is talking to a lawyer about getting his property back, or at least getting compensated for what he lost. Your case gave him the evidence he needed." I told her I was glad, that it mattered. She thanked me again and hung up. I sat there for a while after, thinking about Paul, about how close I'd come to ending up like him. Exhausted, broke, forced to give up something that had been in my family for generations. The only difference was that I'd had the resources to fight back, and I'd been stubborn enough not to quit. That evening, I walked out to the eastern boundary and checked the fence line. Everything was intact. The trail cameras were still running, though I hadn't seen any suspicious activity in weeks. The tire tracks and boot prints had faded, washed away by rain. The trench the backhoe had dug was filled in now, the soil leveled and reseeded. In a few months, you wouldn't be able to tell it had ever been there. I stood under the old oak tree and looked back toward the house. The new gate gleamed in the late afternoon sun, a sharp black line against the pale dirt road. It didn't have the character of the old one, but it had something else. It had meaning. It was proof that I'd stood my ground, that I hadn't let them take what was mine, that boundaries mattered, not just on a map or a deed, but in principle, in the idea that a person has a right to say this far and no further, and to make that stick. I thought about my grandfather, about the day he'd built that original gate, 40-some years ago, planting the posts deep and hanging the wood with care. He'd told me once that a boundary wasn't just about keeping people out. It was about knowing where you belonged, about claiming a space in the world and defending it. Not with violence, not with aggression, but with clarity, with the law, with the simple, stubborn insistence that what's yours is yours. I'd done that. I'd drawn the line. And when they'd crossed it, I hadn't backed down. I'd documented every step, built a case, dragged the truth into the open. And in the end, the truth had been enough. Nadia Strickland had power, resources, a whole organization behind her. But none of that mattered when the facts were clear and the evidence was undeniable. She'd gambled that I wouldn't fight, that I'd be too tired, too intimidated, too isolated to stand up. She'd lost that bet. I pulled out my phone and opened the app for the new gate. I pressed the button and watched it swing open smoothly, then close again with a solid click. It worked perfectly. But more than that, it worked for me, on my terms, under my control. I walked back to the house as the sun dipped below the tree line, painting the sky in shades of orange and deep blue. The farm was quiet. The chickens had settled in for the night. The lettuce rows were growing back thick and green. Everything was as it should be. And the gate, that new steel gate, stood exactly where my grandfather had planted the first one, marking the line, holding the boundary, keeping the promise that this land, this space, this life was mine, and no one, no matter how powerful or determined, was going to take that away. Not without a fight, and not without paying for it. If this story reminded you of why boundaries matter, you're not alone. Too many people face the same fight, the same pressure to give up what's rightfully theirs. But standing your ground is possible when you know your rights and refuse to back down. If Spencer's story resonated with you, hit that subscribe button and join the Karma Fence community. Share this with someone who needs to hear it. And drop a comment below telling us your boundary story. Sometimes, knowing others have fought back is all the courage